Hello. So welcome to MyDrash once again for Parashat Korach this time. So Parashat Korach is really one of my favorite parashas. There's really so much going on there, both on the personal and on the ideological level, that really it's basically impossible to take on the entire parasha in just one 20-minute post. So we're not going to try and do that. I'll just maybe point out a few things at the beginning, and then we'll move on to the main point of today's post. And I also want to sort of clarify that today may be a bit different in terms of the style than what sort of we've been doing until now, since we began. Usually when these posts, when I prepare this material, I try to sort of give a focused interpretation of a midrash. But so many central issues are brought up in the story of Korach, and they're so focused on this in this parsha that I'm going to also go a little bit off topic and sort of focus on a more general concept that I believe is, as you'll see, closely related to the story of Korach, but not necessarily expressed fully in a midrash here, though of course it is expressed in other places. So, for those of you who like the more tightly confined discussion, I hope you won't be too disappointed. And for those of you who like the more freewheeling, jumping from one topic to another, maybe this is a good time for you to join. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin. So the story of Korach, as I'm sure all of you know, talks about Korach, who was a Levi, who comes up and initiates some sort of a civil revolt against Moshe and Aaron, implying that they somehow took to themselves that which they did not deserve. Yeah, took to themselves some sort of a position that they didn't deserve. And he comes outright at the beginning of the parasha and says, Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim u'betocham Hashem. All the people are holy. All the people of Israel are holy equally. U'madua titnas'u al kehar Hashem. And so, and then Moshe and Aaron, why do you put yourselves above people of Israel? He then forces Moshe's hand after Moshe tries to talk with him and convince him otherwise, and eventually two things basically happen. On the one hand, 250 people, leaders of Israel, come and try to bring incense before the Mishkan, and they get burned as a result, in a very similar way to Datan and Aviram, who got burned in a similar way in Parashat Shmini and Vayikra. And Korach and his cohorts, those who were there for unholy reasons, this argument gets swallowed up by the earth as punishment. Now, there are really two major planes upon which we can discuss Korach. One has to do with his actual claim, and the other one has to do with his with the general framework within which his claim was brought up. So we're going to give 2 seconds about the first and focus mainly on the second. So if you look at the Parsha, you'll see that the entire discussion in the Parsha has to do really with the boundaries between the holy and the unholy, between going into who can go into the Mishkan and who cannot. Okay, and we know from the beginning of Parashat, from the beginning of, already from Vayikra, that there's, a clear separation. Only the Kohanim will go into the Mishkan, and later on we hear about this from, at the beginning of Parashat Bamidbar. Specifically it talks about the different areas where each person can go into. And Korach comes and basically rebels against this idea, right? And in fact, there's a great midrash that talks about part of the argument that Korach had with Moshe, where Korach says, if I wore a shirt that was all made of tchelet, with all the color of light blue. And as you know, when we talk about tzitzit, so you're supposed to have not just 8 white strands in each one of the corners, but actually you're supposed to have also a blue strand there, which today some people already have been putting into their talis. And he says, if I had a piece of clothing that was all blue, I obviously don't need to put a blue strand at the end, because it doesn't make any sense, he says. Why should what makes that last blue strand better or more important or more significant spiritually, religiously, than the rest of the cloth? It's also the same color. In the same way, he says, if I have a house full of holy books, okay, full of Torah scrolls, then the idea that I need to put a mezuzah, which only has like a few verses from the Torah, on the entrance to the door, that's ridiculous. I mean, of course, the inside is also more important, and at least equally important, to those few lines that are in the mezuzah. So I don't need a mezuzah in that case. And so what is his argument? He's saying, all the people are holy, so there's nothing that makes you, Moshe and Aaron, special. Yes? And, we don't need any kind of special distinction when we're all so holy. He was basically saying we are all holy in the eyes of God, so we should all have equal positioning. And the rest of the parsha all talks about that. You'll see that once his plan fails, the people of Israel go first blame Moshe and Aaron for killing Korach, and then eventually realize that actually they're coming too close to the Mishkan that caused it. But then they begin to feel that they can't even can't be even within 100 yards of it, or 100 kilometers of it, and then there's like a pushback, and and God tries to somehow reset the boundaries of where you can and where you cannot go. I don't want to go into that too much. There's a lot to say about that discussion. There's also a lot to say about the question of Korach's motivation. Korach, in the end, gets killed in a very special and terrible way, and Chazal saw, and there's definitely evidence in the actual verses to indicate that Korach was not actually having this argument for pure reasons. And that doesn't mean that there weren't those who believed him and thought that he was doing it for the pure reasons and joined him with these ideas in heart and in their minds, but he obviously was not one of those. But today I want to talk about the actual argument. In other words, the way that he phrased his argument and its significance to us even today. I think that there's a lot for us to learn. So in other words, I want to basically tackle the question of, had Korach been a true idealist, or let's say for those who joined him who were true idealists, what is the response to that argument, right? Kol hayadak kulam kedoshim. All the people are holy. What is going on there? What is the response? So the Midrash talks about that story where Korach comes with, talking about the talit shekula tchelet. Even according to some Midrashim, actually him and all of his cohorts came dressed in these, these uniforms full of, all of tchelet without tzitzis, stating as if this was their way of making a demonstration, right, like the logo of their position, trying to give it a good icon to associate with. And when he does that, Moshe tells him, "Dvarim elu lo nitztaveta alehem, umidibcha taboam." These things that you are doing, you weren't commanded to do them, and you're making them up. So what is Moshe's answer? He's saying, he's not actually arguing with Korach. He's not actually saying to him, "This is why you're wrong," and giving him an answer. He's saying to him, "This is not what Hashem said. This is not, the mitzvah." And I think, we need to relate to that answer in two ways. So first of all, that answer may feel to us a bit bland at the beginning. Here comes Korach with a strong ideological position, and all that Moshe can say is, well, that's not what it says in the books. But I think that that's exactly what Moshe was saying, and I think that we have to realize that Moshe's statement was actually perhaps the only real answer to Korach. There are other answers, and they also have their place. But the real answer is that when Korach comes along and says, "Look, here's a piece of a shirt that is all tchelet, so it obviously doesn't require tzitzit," Moshe could tell him, "What you're saying doesn't make any sense, because the only reason we put tzitzit to begin with is because that's what God said to do. There's no meaning to tzitzit if God didn't say to do it. And what you're doing is against what God said. So to use your logic and decide that because of your logic we should go against what God says, that doesn't make any sense, right? The source of authority, the source of commitment to putting on tzitzit or to putting on a mezuzah is from God. So it's what God says is what we do, not what you feel like. And I think that in that, if you look at it that way, then the Midrash here is pitting. It's not just some discussion where the answer is obvious. The Midrash is saying, when you come along and say, I have some ideal, I have something I believe in, a moral that an ethic that I am truly committed to, and I'm so believe in it that I feel that it has to become integrated into the Torah. It has to become part of what the Torah supports, and in the ways that I think that it should support it. Then that's not the way it works. The Torah has its own rules. God gave us these rules and told us how to apply them. And if you don't like it, that's your problem. You want to not follow God. That's one thing. But you're not going to come along and change halacha just because you happen to have some ideal. My father once had a discussion with somebody who was complaining about something that was going on in our shul that he wasn't happy about. And it had to do with a topic which I won't mention over here. It's not important, and we'll just set us off course. But something that is still a very contentious topic in Jewish circles. And he was saying, we have to change, the way we do things in order, because it's immoral to do things the way we're doing it now. And my father said to him, with all due respect, you want to, make changes. I understand that, but coming along and saying because what halacha currently says today doesn't fit in with Western morality, you need to change halacha. That doesn't make any sense. God's commands and commandments are eternal, and whatever modifications can occur don't occur by somebody coming along and saying, well, now this idea doesn't suit me, so I'm not going to do it anymore. Okay, so in that sense, Moshe and Korach are facing off in an age-old sort of tension between orthodoxy and more liberal strains, where and please don't take this to say that I believe that there is no evolution in halacha, etc. Of course, there are methods in which that occurs, but that's what the Midrash is pointing out. It's talking about Korach coming along and flailing this ideal of we're all equal, we're all holy equally before God, and therefore he concludes something. And Moshe says to him, I may not disagree with your ideal, but I do disagree with the application of your ideal. Saying that because of this ideal, the conclusion is that we must go and do so and so. That's not what halacha says, and therefore, we don't go that way. But what I want to talk about more is the actual answer that Moshe might have given Korach had he wanted to. And this answer sort of ties in also to what I was just talking about, to the following halacha. What is really the problem with what Korach said? What is the problem with the approach of Korach? And it doesn't even matter what the ideal that he would be flailing about would be. It doesn't matter that he was talking about some form of egalitarian approach of, sort of like that has to do with the way people relate to holiness. It could have been any other ideal that he would decide to make, his badge of his badge that he would decide to sort of promote. The problem with Korach is the fact that he doesn't seem to realize that every ideal has to have boundaries. And this is a very, sometimes it's depending on who, sort of like how you present it or who you're talking to, your audience can have a very difficult time to accept or to understand what this means. Ideals seem to actually be the things that don't have any boundaries. They are, they're pure. They have this, this beautiful purity that allows them to sort of withstand time and adversity and challenges. But the truth is that all ideals have boundaries, and the reason that they have boundaries is because those boundaries are the places where they clash with other ideals. So if you have two ideals, one of them has to do with free choice, and the other one has to do with sort of like the importance of a society or of assisting others, then we will say, you can be, we give you free choice to do what you want with your own time and your own money, but you also have a commitment to other people. But we're not going to say that your commitment to other people is completely all-encompassing. You have no right to take care of yourself. And we're not going to say that your duty towards yourself automatically, all the time, overpowers and overshadows your commitment to others. Truth is that there's different times, and each time has its own, and different events, different situations, and different situations require different behavior, because there really are these different ideals, and at times they clash. In fact, most of the time, the most interesting, ethical questions are not ones where the answer is clear cut and it's only about a person overcoming himself. It's when the ideals clash, and when it's not always clear, or at least it can be deceiving, what is the right blend of these ideas. And here comes Korach and says, I have an idea, I have an ideal, and I really, really believe in it. And therefore, he says, that the problem is in the conclusion. Therefore, he says, it must automatically override all other considerations. And halacha, in a sense, is God's attempt, but of course, successful attempt. I'm putting it that way because, of course, eventually also there are human beings involved in the process of halacha development. But halacha is a set of laws, and laws in their ideal form are supposed to be some sort of a balance between different sets of morals. Trying to strike a balance, saying this is where, when the morals, different ethics clash, here is where we draw the line. We say, up till here we do this, and beyond here we don't do that. Right? So you could say punishing a thief is a moral thing, but how much should we punish? You could cut off his hand, or you could poke out his eye, or kill him, or you could just have him return, the money he stole, or give him some sort of a fine. Where do you put the line? Where do you draw the line is not only a question of how much it's really about the boundaries of morals, of sort of where is the, right place to limit yourself on each one of the different considerations you have. And the problem with Korach was, as I said, that he didn't realize that he needed to somehow curb his enthusiasm of this one ideal, because he can't see that if you take that ideal too far, it may clash with other ideals. You might ask what other ideals might there be that would clash with this. I won't, that's not the topic over here, though I will say that when everybody, just as a thought, I'm not saying this is the reason, I'm just proposing one option which you can consider, which is that when everybody has access to the Holy of Holies, then it loses its special nature, its uniqueness. And in order for it to continue to be holy versus the mundane, then you need to have these walls set up to sort of keep out most people most of the time, so that when you get there it's really meaningful. But that's not the topic today. I do want to come along and say one last thing, and that will end up. ideals we have many of, and as we just now mentioned, they are constantly in conflict with each other. And so you might think that I'm trying to propose, or that I'm saying that halacha is saying that we always have to be balanced. That there's always, this push, this tug of war between the different forces, and we always have to strike a balance. And so things are always going to be nice, right? We're always going to find a way to sort of, mix and match things in a way that will sort of be balanced, and everybody's going to always be, exactly like on that line, if they follow, halacha or some other, perfect moral legal system. But I think that morals in this way are also very similar to life. We have ups and downs in life, and usually we have days which are usually some sort of mixture of happy and sad. But we also have days which are very high and very low. When we get married, chas v'chalila, unfortunately, when there's a death in the family or in the community, and I think ideals are like that too, and that even though most of the time we need to keep some sort of a balance, there are times which require, on a one-time basis, special treatment, where one ideal trumps all others and takes over. We know that this happens in halacha in a few places. One of them is, of course, the fact that human life almost always trumps everything, but that's actually a law that occurs a lot, right? So that may not be a good example of this sort of, once-in-a-lifetime event. But we also know that the Rambam says this, etc., and other people too, that a prophet cannot change halacha, but he can postpone halacha temporarily. Giving the example of Eliyahu, the prophet who sacrificed outside of the Mikdash, even though the Mikdash was around, because it was needed. Right? You needed to be a prophet to do that. But today we don't have any prophets, and maybe at times there are special events which require special treatment. This is the idea that appears in halacha of Eit lasot la'Hashem heferu Toratecha. When there's a time to do for God, you can also go against the Torah. But where that rule is used, how you can apply it, who decides how to apply it, is a big question. But it's important to realize that does exist. The realization that at some point, reality can push you to a point where one ideal has to conquer all the others, has to, basically take control temporarily, I think is a real truth about life and about reality. And I really believe that it's an important rule to keep in mind, that we also have to keep in mind for our lives, that there are times that we need to realize that balance can hold us back from doing the right thing. But at the same time, realize that it's only because it's temporary that makes it okay. And in that vein, I want to bring two stories, and with that we'll finish up. One of them is that we once asked my rabbi, one of my rabbis, how it was that all these Hasidic rabbis, every so often we have these stories about how they would go against halacha. And his answer was very interesting, and it took me a long time till I really understood it, which was, he said, only once you understand that halacha is iron and unbreakable can you break it. And what I think he meant was what we were saying now, is that the only way that they could reach a point where they could actually make an exception to the rule of halacha is once it was a rule. And once they broke the rule temporarily, but then came back to it. But only once they truly embedded that idea could they allow themselves to also have that freedom. And another example for this idea, we probably all know the famous Hasidic story about the poor farmer who didn't know how to read and write, and he walks into the shul one day, and he just wants to daven. And he says to God, God, I don't know how to daven. All I know is the letters. So I will say the letters to you, and you arrange them in any way that you feel like, so that it comes out to be a prayer that you appreciate. And he begins to say Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, etc. And that story is trying to say, like, how wonderful that is. How here's a man who can't access God through the Siddur because he doesn't know how to read and write, and yet he still does. He still doesn't let it hold him back, and he touches God in a sense in a unmediated way, without all those words that the rabbis wrote down for him to say. He just says what he feels. It is a beautiful story, and I think that there's a great truth to it. That we, that sometimes the patterns that we're given in the Siddur or in Halacha in general can be stifling. They can limit us in our expression of our connection to God. But I want to make it clear that this story is by no way saying that the next day the same farmer comes in, and this time not alone, but a whole bunch of farmers, and they all say to the rabbi, "We don't want to daven like you do. We're going to make our own davening." And begin saying Aleph Bet Gimel, and that's the new davening. And maybe they'll even have a chazan who's going to say Aleph Bet Gimel, etc., etc. Meaning the only reason this story is worthy and meaningful is because it's a one-timer, because it doesn't break the basic requirement of following, the staples that were set before us either by the rabbis of old or by God Himself. It's because it's a one-timer that it's significant, because that's what makes it unique and meaningful. It's that you say, I am breaking out of the mold, but there is a mold, and that mold is the way we're supposed to do it. Only sometimes that mold can't be enough. When those times are, these are all very deep questions, and it's not a simple question to answer, and I don't plan to answer it over here, and definitely not prompting everybody to go out today and change everything. But also to realize that change is sometimes an important thing, and it can be important religiously. It can only do that when it's not the new norm, when it's not the new fad. We're all going to be, it's like, in Life of Brian, we're all individuals. Like, you have to make sure that you keep these things, under control for yourself and for your community as a whole. So with that, I wish you all Shabbat Shalom.